Welcome to Fun with Type in Photoshop. I'm going to first off download this American Captain font. I'll suggest that you download a font, but it does not have to be this one. I would ask that it be a heavy sans serif font, such as this. So I'm going to download this and install the font. To install the font, if you're in Google Chrome, it comes down here to the Downloads bar, which is in the Downloads folder. You're going to look for basically one of these words that has an icon in front of it with a little A. That is a font file. And you can see this particular one has an OpenType and a TrueType font file. I'm going to go ahead and install both. If you have both, I just suggest going ahead and installing both. Sometimes if a font has like a bold and an italics version or whatever, it'll have it. Alright, so it went ahead and took it. It says I don't need it again, so I'm good to go. Once that's done, then you'll open up Photoshop. And remember that it does not show up in Photoshop immediately. So after you download the font, then open Photoshop. If Photoshop's already open, you're going to need to close it and then start back. I'm going to ask that you kind of create this with me so you can pause as needed to complete these activities. I'm going to click on File and New. We're going to create a new document. In this case, we're going to create a document that is 1,000 pixels wide and 800 pixels high with a resolution of 150 and a background color that is white. Please be sure your measurement is pixels. If your measurement is inches, you will lock your computer up. 1,000 inches is a lot of inches. Mrs. Skinner is 62 inches tall. So just giving you that for food for thought. Okay, so when you hit OK, we'll be in here. I'm going to ask you to go ahead and save this document to your classwork folder. We're just going to call it Fun with Fonts, if you would. And then we'll get started. So I'm going to show you a few new things with regards to using fonts in Photoshop today. Remember that we're going to use the Type tool to do most things with fonts because that's what they are. Fonts are created using type. We've talked about the different types of type. We have point type, which you just click one time and start typing. And that's that one. Or you have what we call paragraph type, which is where you click and drag and draw a box, and then you can type in it. But the problem is when you're doing that, if you draw more words than fit in the box, they just disappear. So while you're still inside the box and on your type tool, you can click on this plus sign and pull out until the word fits, and then it fits. So I don't suggest using this paragraph type. I'm actually going to cancel it because I don't like it and get rid of it. So point type is kind of the easiest to work with. In this case, you're going to put your name in here and then do change it to that font of whatever font you downloaded. And in my case, it was American Captain. And then size it up so it's a pretty good size, taking up about this much of your page. Now what we're going to do is something a little bit different. We've talked so far about how vectors are created when you insert either text or shapes into Photoshop. And those are things that can be resized freely. So I'm actually going to convert this text to a vector, well, a more specific kind of vector, which is a shape, because we can edit shapes in Photoshop. And let me show you how. And it's really cool because you can't do this with type otherwise. So I'm going to right-click the type layer just out here in the blue spot and choose Convert to Shape. Now it's going to look more like it does when we insert shapes. We have a color box for the color, and then we have this is called a mask, but we have a little mask that has the words in it. Now this is no longer editable text, but it's not rasterized. It actually is still a vector. It's just a shape. And if you look carefully, you'll see little lines around it. Now there's not really lines on my text. If I click on my background, they go away. But that's the outside edges of my text, which is now a shape. Okay. So if your text is a shape, you can do different things to it. For one, when you press Control-T, instead of the type warp that we have up here, we have access to all of these other ones. The one that I'm going to go with here is perspective. We're going to pull the edges and get kind of a perspective thing like it's coming towards us. And there we go. Now you do have other options, so feel free to Control-T and just play with the other options and undo so you can see what other options you have for those transformations. And these are the options we would have on a regular layer, but we don't have those same options on a typical text layer. Now just for fun, we're actually going to duplicate this so that there's a whole bunch of these Tanya layers, or in your case it'll be your name. Now you all know that if we hold Alt and we drag, we can make a copy. I'm going to undo that. Instead of doing it that way, what we are going to do is we are going to hold down Alt and just press the right keyboard arrow. That's going to make a copy. You notice the mouse changes to that same thing it would if you Alt drag. And when I push the arrow, see it says Tanya copy, and I'm going to keep pushing it. It's going to keep making copies. So I'm making a bunch of copies. I'm going to make like 15 copies. Now notice it so kindly calls them copy, whatever here, so I know how many I have. Now we are going to take the original and put it all the way back on the top, because that's our original and it's in the spot that I want it to be, which is that spot there. What we're creating here is sort of pretend 3D text. So I'm going to take the rest of these layers, I'm going to click on the top one and hold Shift and scroll down and click on the bottom one. This is all the copies. We're going to take all the copies and merge them together. So once they are all blue, right click in this blue space and you're going to merge these layers. Okay, so now they are all merged. Notice that because we've merged them, they're no longer shapes. So now they are rasterized. We can see the checkerboard. What we're going to do now, and this is pretty fun, is we are going to add a gradient. So the FX button, we're going to add a gradient overlay to give it this 3D look. And basically, here's the settings I want you to go with, but you can play around with it. What I have mine set at is a black to white, and if you click on it, it's this third one. I have a black to white gradient that's linear at 90 degrees, so that's why it goes straight up like that. Now again, you can totally play with this and do whatever you want. There's rainbow gradients and a bunch of different ones. I just personally think that the black and white one looks pretty cool. Now you might mess with the colors. Here we have like a red to green. I probably wouldn't go green, so I will double click that green stop and maybe choose a gray or something. That looks kind of neat too. So whatever you want to do is fine. A linear gradient means it starts at one side and goes to the other. There is a radial gradient, which is like middle out. So see here in the middle and it goes out, so it doesn't really look very good. There's angle, reflected, and diamond. And just to me, none of those quite do it. So I go linear. You could modify how this, is put together, and that's totally up to you. Whatever you like. Okay? So that's our first thing that we're going to create. And again, you'll have a gradient overlay there. If you wanted to, now I've clicked off of it so we can see that all the borders are gone. This one is on a layer all its own. So you technically could put a very light stroke on it. I would not suggest using black, and I would definitely size it down to like a 1. But you could do that. If I do that, typically I use just a little bit, like it's a hair darker of the color. So if it's red, I just use a tiny bit darker, like a brick red. And then to me, it just kind of helps it stand out a little bit. So feel free to play with that, as you wish. This gradient overlay, of course, is applying to that back layer. So whatever you do to this top layer won't mess with that back layer. All right, so that's the first thing. That's converting a text to a shape using the warp and then applying some special features there to make it look kind of 3D. The other thing I want to show you, we're just going to copy this first name. So I'm just going to Alt-drag this first Tanya here to this layer. So now we have another one, and I'm going to name this bottom one Crazy Tanya. So I'm going to mess with this font a little bit. Now, whenever you have converted your text to shapes, you can now edit your text, which is really cool, by using this button. Now, yours may be on the black arrow. We don't want the black arrow, so click and hold. It's the button below the type tool to get the direct selection tool. Now, initially, it doesn't seem like it does anything. If you click on your letters, like nothing happens. But if you click on points of your letters, that's where the magic is. So now I can actually grab a hold of the individual pieces of the letters. You got to click once to click on the dot to select it, and then a second time to actually mess with it. So like I'm clicking here, I'm clicking once on the dot to select just that dot, and then I can drag down. Click once on the path, on the line, anywhere around the edges. Then click once on the dot you want to mess with, and then click and drag up or whatever. So once on the path, that's the line that goes around, and then make the changes as you see fit. Again, if you click in the middle, nothing happens. You have to click on the outside edges. So there we go. And there's my crazy name. With my crazy name, I'm going to go ahead and hit my FX button and make some changes to it. This time I'm going to use a pattern overlay. To show you what a pattern overlay is you can see here, it goes immediately in and there's patterns. There are patterns that are built in. You can hit this little play button to get a bunch of categories. So for instance, texture fill 2, I'm going to hit OK. And then I'm not going to save any changes, and that gives me all of these. So I can put some sort of crazy texture in there. This is the opacity, which is how see-through that is. So right now, the texture is completely overtaking it. So if I want that color to show through, I can start pulling this back a little bit and letting some of that color blend in. If you go all the way, you'll lose it completely, so you don't want to go all the way out there. You can also scale it, how big your pattern is or how small your pattern is. So if you're wanting it to be tinier, you can scale it down, like so. All right, isn't that fun? So anyway, there's those. And now, like, looking at this, I probably should have kerned these letters before I actually did all this converting, stuff. But I can't now. I could, I guess, attempt to move these letters by using this little arrow tool. But, once you've made those changes, you do have to kind of really be careful because that text is no longer editable as text. And so now you're going to have, like I've got here, kind of some really funky letter business happening. But, at least it's editable because we do have these little points with that direct selection tool. All right. So that's basically that. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create rasterized text so I can mess it up. So I'm going to make another copy. I'm going to copy this, so Alt-Drag. Oops, I just Alt-Dragged my A. By the way, when you're on the direct selection, you can choose just certain things, and so you have to be very careful. And Alt-Dragging obviously created a duplicate of my letter A. I'm going to choose my Move tool here and then click on it. All right, Alt-Drag. Here we go. I'm going to size this down, so I'm going to Control-T it, size this down so it's smaller. And then for this particular one, I'm going to rasterize this, which makes it going to be like this one down here. So again, it's not editable, and it won't be a vector. It can't be resized freely anymore because it will get blurry. So I'm going to right-click in the blue space and rasterize the layer. And now we can see that, and I can take off these things too and make it back to normal if I want to. What I wanted to show you, I'm going to zoom up, and it's going to look blurry because we're going to be at 250% or 300% or whatever, is that you can take an eraser or even a paintbrush. So let me just turn off these effects. I could take a paintbrush. Say I take a red paintbrush. So here's my paintbrush. I'm going to come up here and just draw. Let me turn my basic brushes on. All right, so I'm just going to grab one of these brushes. I'm going to click on my color box and choose the color of my T. And I'm just going to paint. Now, to make your brush bigger or smaller, to the right of the letter P, you use the bracket. Left bracket makes it littler. Right bracket makes it bigger. I'm going to use a little one, and I'm just going to kind of draw out from it a little bit, like a little blob here on the end. You could do bigger. I'm just trying to rush through here. Whatever. Making me some bloody looking words here. It's going to be bloody good. Okay. Now that I've done that, because this is a rasterized layer, I can actually use this cool filter on here and do different things. And Liquify is kind of a fun one to use. So I'm going to grab a hold of my Liquify filter. It comes in here, and then again you can zoom up if you want to so you can see better. Well, not that much probably. And then you can take these funny little buttons and do different things. So like this is push, which again my brush is humongous, so I'm going to size my brush down, and you can't see that part of my screen. I'm trying to pull it over. Here we go. I'm going to size my brush down. I'm like 272. So there we go. And then you can actually push these pixels around a bit. Some sort of just destroying this word. Now again, this is destructive. This is going to get blurry. We can't make this bigger or whatever. So you do have to be really careful here when you're using these. That's the little push one with the little finger. And there's other ones you could do too. This little twirl one, if you get to the bottom of one of these, you can just kind of click and drag, and it'll kind of twirl it a little bit based on how you click and drag. So there's lots of different little things that you can do in here. Bloat tool is going to make things fatter. I like to sometimes do that at the tip of the little bloody part or whatever. Just kind of to make it look like there's a little driplet kind of collecting or whatever. You can hit OK, and then of course you've got this kind of look here to your font. So I got some sort of bloody text going on. Likewise, you can use your eraser tool right here. And the eraser tool, again, we have more brushes that we can use. Erasers are just brushes, by the way. Sometimes there are some natural brushes. I'm going to go to Natural 2 that look sort of worn. And so you can kind of create your own grungy font by using an eraser and erasing on these. So I can take and just sort of chip away a little bit at a time here on these letters and kind of make it a little more, fun and funky, if you will. And if you end up adding any other things like layer styles, it'll go around it. So if I turn my stroke back on, my stroke now is kind of all jaggedy and weird to match. So there you go. There's some new features in playing around with text in Photoshop.